what are super platforms. According to our definition, these are the internet giants. And by this, we mean the digital platforms that are multisectoral in approach. They have a potential to draw users into digital ecosystems and shape digital financial inclusion. We again mention about MSMEs in Africa. Why MSMEs in Africa? 90% of the commerce is being run by these micro retailers. They also provide 70% of employment to so many people who are in Africa. Why did we do this research? Basically, what we wanted to understand was the current merchants' behavior and practices relating to super platforms. And also the other thing we wanted to determine the value proposition of the super platforms to merchants and vice versa. Before going to the field, we came up with 3 hypotheses, whereby we wanted to get to know more information as we go to the field. So our hypothesis number 1, we wanted to find out if merchants don't have really to be fully digital so that they can sell online. The other hypothesis that we wanted to understand the business-to-business services, but the super platforms are essential for MSMEs to be able to increase the chances of their success of their businesses. The hypothesis number 3, we wanted to understand how e-commerce strategies can increase the chances of young adults, and by young adults, we mean people who are of ages between 18 to 35 years to be able to generate income or even find employment. I'll take you through to some of our merchant stories, whereby we were able to interview 25 merchants and end consumers in Tanzania in their capital city of Dar es Salaam. Out of the 25 people that we interviewed, we were able to bucket them into 3 personas. We have experimental MSMEs, we have unstable SMEs, and then we have stable MSMEs. I'll give a story about experimental MSMEs by the name of Agnes. We found out that this particular merchant, she was of age of 27, and how she came about forming her business, her online business, was because she was using already Instagram, which is quite popular in Tanzania, and she would post some of her stylish clothes and also accessories. And she found out that so many people were liking her photos on the Instagram. They would ask her where did she get the clothes and the accessories. So she saw an opportunity for her to start a business by trying to source for those clothes or accessories, and then she sells to these people who are inquiring, like how would they go about getting such clothes from her. She did very well because now she started being very good in navigating the social media platforms, and she would actually post on the Instagram and then try to push the messages on Facebook and eventually does the conversion of the business on WhatsApp, because that's where most of them would end up with one-on-one conversation. The interesting bit with Agnes is like she found an opportunity. And in finding that opportunity, it meant like the social media platforms that she was using, they didn't require her to have any capital in advance in order for her to be able to carry out such business. But what we realized as time grew, like there was a need for her to expand this type of business. We found out that she was getting limitations because where she would go to source for some of the clothes and accessories, they required her to pay beforehand. And then when she delivers to the customers, that's when she would receive the payment. So that was a hindrance on her own part. The other thing we found out, as she conducted this business, there is no way she had like proper records, which would enable her to go to any financial service provider so that they could be able maybe to advance her any loan for her to be able to expand her business. So what she thought, she resorted to, she went to the digital credit, whereby she would access some digital credit from her phone, but she shared with us that it was a bit painful because it was a barrier in itself. The ticket size that she was receiving from the digital platform, from the digital credit, it was not all that would enable her to be able to grow her business further. So I'll also discuss about our next merchant, who is Moses. Moses is a hotelier. And when he got back to the country he used to work in Dubai. When he got back to the country in Tanzania, he saw an opportunity because her mom used to have this great recipe of biryani. So every Friday he started supplying food, and some of the social media platforms that Moses used mostly was Twitter. So he came up with a hashtag campaign whereby if you retweet his tweet, he would always end up giving like a discounted price or even give a free plate of biryani. So that made so many people to start retweeting most of his posts, and he increased and got a very large follower base. The most tricky bit when it comes to Moses is like in 2 years' time, he was able to see his customer base increase by promoting the business online from selling 30 plates to 200 plates. But with this, he had to encounter so many challenges when it comes to the bottlenecks and also bandwidth constraints, because he was doing everything by himself, from preparing the biryani to packaging the biryani and also to making the delivery. He also, equally as Agnes, talked about the limitations when it comes to the capital of allowing him to be able to grow further, and also the challenges that he was facing as a person, because as many of you might understand maybe the way DoorDash works, whereby at every minute after they have dispatched your food, they keep on updating you. That's what Moses was doing. So it was too much for him. He was actually using like 3 phones to keep on pushing the messages, because we also they shared with us that the customer relationship was very important in order to push their businesses online. So these are some of the challenges and barriers that we found out with, especially Agnes and Moses. Because of time, we're not going to talk about the stable merchants, but I will hand over the mic to my colleague, John, who is going to move us forward onto the learnings that we got from this field research. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne and Carmen. And so we'll share here 4 insights that we're summarizing for time. And again, for the full discussion of insights, you can see the file, the presentation that we will share after. And so our first insight here is really about trust. And so we found that because e-commerce is still so risky in emerging markets for both merchants and for customers, trust becomes especially important in these interactions. We spoke with customers who said that they see many products being sold on Instagram and Facebook and WhatsApp. But how can they tell which products are real and which are fake? How can they tell which sellers, which merchants are legitimate and which will defraud them? When we spoke with merchants as well, they were struggling to differentiate themselves from the increasing numbers of online merchants. And they did this in a few ways: by building a personal brand, providing high quality over-the-top service, as Moses did, and being responsive to every online inquiry. And so we can imagine on this online marketplace, the customers on one side, and on the other side of the platform, the merchant is there. They're both staring at their screens, trying to figure out, is this other person real? Should I go through with this transaction? And it's just really hard to know. Our second insight here is around the use of business tools, which we found to be very low among online MSMEs. And every merchant that we talked to used the free services offered by platforms, such as Instagram and WhatsApp. Only one merchant that we met used paid services in the form of targeted ads. And she was the only one that understood the value of targeting ads to likely customers that might be interested in her products and services and likely to buy. Everyone else didn't understand that, had not learned that, thought it was too expensive, and also was inhibited by the interface. It was too complicated for them. And while this keeps costs low, the opportunity costs are just high in terms of time and effort. On the next slide, insights 3 and 4 really build on the work that BFA and FIBR have done on understanding merchant ecosystems. And so insight 3 really speaks to how online merchants desire more ways to source their products and supplies. Many desirable goods, such as electronics and luxury items, merchants really want to get them from China, Alibaba, or the US, Amazon. But the barrier they face is payment methods. These platforms require bank accounts and credit cards, and the smallest MSMEs don't have access to that easily, or they prefer mobile money. Insight 4 speaks to the lack of access to traditional financial services. Online merchants also struggle with this because they are by and large informal and quite small. In our quantitative research, our survey in 3 markets, we found that up to 70% of the merchants surveyed who are selling online did not have any bank loans. Those that do use loans use mobile money credit products. And like Agnes, as Anne shared earlier, experimental merchants are trying their luck with digital credit products like Tala and Branch, but with mixed results. So those are our 4 insights. In the next section, we'll talk about how we understand the journey of the merchants selling online on platforms, and also opportunities for solutions. And so our first journey is really around trust, because it is such a critical factor. And we want to compare, how does trust play out for the traditional merchants, and how is it sort to look different for the online merchants? And so we can understand that for a traditional merchant with a physical shop, there's some upfront labor and capital required to find the location, set up the physical shop, buy inventory, stock the shelves. And then once you have those basic building blocks in place, you just have to open the shop and be open for business, and customers come in. And a sale can really happen relatively quickly, in a matter of minutes, let's say. For the online merchant on the bottom of the journey, setup can be free. It's free to set up an Instagram account. And as we saw with Agnes, as Anne told us, she had one business and then she decided to start another one with relative ease. But the labor then becomes distributed over the course of that interaction of the journey, where it's all about posting. In DAR in July, in our fieldwork, we ran a focus group with merchants that began at 8 a.m. We asked all the merchants, who here has already posted their WhatsApp status update slideshow for the day? Everyone raised their hand. So we understand that the workflow of the online merchant is constantly posting and checking their phones. And so once they have posted and become discoverable and are considered active by prospective customers, then they receive numerous likes, hearts, comments, messages, and the merchant has to spend a lot of time and effort discerning which of these digital signals that are blowing up their smartphones will lead them to high quality leads versus low quality leads that are unlikely to buy. The other thing I'll point out here is that the funnel is also shaped differently in that whereas a physical merchant with a shop might have 50 people coming through in a day, converting to sales. What we heard from merchants, especially traditional merchants that started to sell online, was that they now had access to many, many more customers prospectively beyond their networks and beyond their neighborhoods. And they liked that. But the efficiency was so low because the conversion ended up being much smaller, right? And there's so many more actions that they had to take in order to sustain, maintain interest and engagement, and to convert, and also to maintain trust over a longer sales cycle. The journey to fulfill a physical product, often sourced from a supplier, sometimes even from overseas, can take up to 2 months. And so we can imagine drop-off happens quite a lot, and that's a big concern for merchants. So then on the next slide, you can see a photo of the merchant focus group that we conducted, and we started to share ideas and solutions with these merchants and get their feedback and ideas for improving them. We asked them to prioritize and even force trade-offs around some of these solutions to really understand the mind of the online merchants and what would work for them. And then in December, during a FIBR conference in Nairobi, we shared these ideas with some market actors, including David, our panelist from Masoko, Sarafu Azante was also in the room, Sendi, Aladdin, Link, others, Interpay was also there. So it was a great room, and we asked them to roll up their sleeves and co-design some of these solutions with us for merchants and from the perspective of the platforms and providers. You can see some examples here. And then on the next slide, we'll start to share with you our ideas. And we'll do this by walking through 4 stages of the online merchant journey. We'll talk about each stage. Then we'll show a spectrum of ideas. And then we'll double click into 1 or 2 ideas that are coming to life in the market today. So the first stage is around onboarding. And so when we think about like, what does it take to onboard to online from having an offline business or not at all? And the majority of MSMEs, I can imagine like a Duca shop owner or market stand trader, what will it take for them to feel comfortable and supported in starting up their first Facebook account or Instagram account or WhatsApp, right? And using that for business. And so the questions that we start to ask here is, how do we just make it more accessible? And then how do we offer more guidance and support? And if we click through, we can then show our spectrum of ideas. And in terms of how we'll show the spectrum, is that on the left side, next slide. On the left side of the spectrum, we'll sit ideas that live more at the feature level. What are improvements and tweaks that we can make to existing services? On the right side will be ideas that sit more at the product level, standalone products and entirely new services. I'll only pick out a few solutions to talk through here. Digital helpers on the bottom. Every merchant we talk to had a digital helper in their life at some point. Help them set up their account, teach them how to use Instagram, and even in a few cases, we heard about digital helpers that were paid, social media influencers that increased their follower count, et cetera, or ran campaigns for them. The idea that we'll double click into is bundled services, because onboarding involves many different components, from information and training to using hardware and apps, and it also can be tailored by the type of merchant in terms of sector, product, service, et cetera, as well as by the persona, right? Are they experimental and more of a risk taker, like Agnes? Are they poised for growth and besieged by bottlenecks like Moses? Or are they a stable MSME who considers online selling a secondary side hustle? So we can think about that in those ways. And if we go to the next slide, we saw one example of a startup, Jose, who is doing something similar for merchants at this point of the journey. And so Jose provides business insights to small merchants to help them run their business better, kind of reflecting their data back to them. But then they also offer just-in-time education through the app, and also through in-person trainings. And we started to ask, what would it look like for merchants just getting started on the online selling journey to have access to more opportunities to learn and be guided and be supported along the way. And Jose is a partner of FIBR as well. On the next slide, we'll talk about the second stage of the journey, which is building trust and building online brand. And we've already talked about this in terms of the need for trust to facilitate online and e-commerce on the super platforms. And the questions we ask here are things like, how do we help the smallest merchants establish a business presence and a business brand, professional communications? The other question, if you click through, is around how do we just increase trust throughout the online selling experience? And then on the next slide, we show the spectrum of ideas. On the right, one of the things that folks were excited about in the Nairobi workshop in December was a trust marketplace. And we've seen customer reviews work well on platforms and super platforms, from Amazon to eBay to Uber, right? And so we wonder, how could this start to take off in places like East Africa and other emerging markets? Could this spur more growth? On the left side, improved professional content. Many platforms already provide tutorials, information, videos even. It actually wouldn't take that much to optimize that for the needs of small merchants. The idea that we'll double click into here is standardized customer service and protections. when a customer buys online, whether it's from an individual seller on WhatsApp or even an established marketplace like Jumia, we heard that customers are often unsure what happens if they're not satisfied with their purchase. Can they get support? Can they get a return or a refund? Will they lose their money is the fear. And so this actually inhibits some sellers and creates a lot of confusion and inefficiency. So we were really inspired by a startup in Kenya called LipaSafe, which provides digital escrow service. And Amalo wrote about this in her blog post on trust and Superplatforms. And in this case, this service protects the money and assets of the customer and the merchant until the agreed upon terms have been met. And so we wonder here, like, what would it look like for more platforms to be providing more protective services like this and putting in place guardrails? Could that help increase more activity on e-commerce? So then we can move on to our third stage of the online merchant journey, accessing working capital and business tools. And this really speaks to our the insight that we shared earlier. And the questions that we asked here is, how do we just make them more accessible? Analytics and Instagram analytics and things, business merchant tools actually are out there, but the merchants that we spoke with weren't using them. So how do we bridge that gap? And how do we, address working capital issues for the small online merchants? So our spectrum of ideas on the next slide will show a number of potential solutions. Though I want to highlight a few here. AI-driven tools. So this is an area that FIBR has done a lot of work around to see how can artificial intelligence, machine learning, smartphone technology really be put to work for the MSME. Capturing informal business activity, sharing that data with financial service providers, and helping merchants manage their inventory, and etc. The idea we'll double click into here is in-kind credit. So many merchants today receive informal credit from their suppliers, and they have many, many suppliers. What would this look like to be provided from more platforms and also digitally? And so the two examples that we want to lift up for you today are from two FIBR partners, SocoWatch and Sarafu, Azanpay. And SocoWatch is an e-commerce platform that is doing this for its customers, its retailers, and was featured in a prior merchant webinar from FIBR. And then Sarafu and Faraz, our panelists later, can speak more to this directly. Sarafu is a mobile payment system that, through its digital rewarding system, allows payment flexibility. So they're really exploring what does it look like to meet the merchant in terms of their payment needs, including forms of in-kind credit, equivalent to what merchants receive right now informally. Our last and fourth stage of the journey is formalizing and scaling up. And this is adding sales channels, opening a physical location, making the leap to selling on an e-commerce platform like a Jumia or Amazon or Alibaba. And this was a little bit like the holy grail for merchants. They really wanted to get here, really ambitious merchants such as Moses. But no one we talked to who was an online MSME was able to reach this. So we learned a lot about the barriers and challenges. And we asked, how could we help them realize the benefits of formalization and also take this advanced step? Our ideas here are just a few, but a small one, relatively small one is how do we streamline formalization? How can platforms really sponsor and facilitate this for their merchants, whether it's types of registration or helping them with payment accounts? The idea that we want to double click into here is the micro consulting group for MSMEs. And if you go to the next slide, this is actually an idea that FIBR piloted over the course of 6 weeks with 20 mobile money agents to offer hands-on, tailored consulting and support, expert advice, as well as creating a forum for peer support. And so the results of this were quite interesting in terms of high engagement, high desire, yeah, and just the level of support that allowed some of these merchants to run their business. And Anne was actually a direct part of this project as well. And is there anything else that you would add to this description?
Maybe just to highlight that it was a unique way of sharing information, especially with the mobile money agents, because these are resources that they did not know where to go for. So it was very powerful in so many ways, and I think that's a very good way of making sure that MSMEs are able to gather more information that can help them scale up in their businesses.
Great, thank you. And so this is our online merchant journey, the 4 stages that we were thinking about, and the ideas that fall under them. I would like to transition into our panel, and after that, we will open up for questions. And please build on our insights and ideas. Let us know what you think. And so I'll introduce our panel very quickly and allow them to introduce themselves, actually. So we have David from Masoko, out of Safaricom. We have Firas from Sarafu and Azampe, and Kachoka from BSA, whom you heard from. And then I will be moderating this panel with a set of questions. And as a reminder, there is a Q&A tab at the bottom of your webinar screen for audience members. So if you wish to ask a question, please input it into the chat box there, and we will be managing the queue. So once we get to the point for Q&A, we will do this. Great. And so let's get started. So let me just ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves very quickly in 1 or 2 sentences, and then we'll begin with the questions. David, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So hello, everyone. This is David Kago. I have the technology arm of the e-commerce platform for Safaricom, which we call Masoko. So we've been in business for the last 1.5 years. And trying to tap into the e-commerce industry, not just in Kenya, but in Africa as a whole.
Great. Firas?
Sure. Hi, my name is Firas Ahmed. I'm the CEO for Sarafu. We're also looking into the e-commerce space, more specifically around payments to retail merchants in Tanzania. So we've been operating for the last, really just launching formally soon, but we have been piloting for the last, I'd say, about a year. So we've had some success in convincing some of these retail merchants to switch to an e-commerce ordering system for their supplies.
Great. And Anne?
My name is Anne Gashoka. I'm a qualitative user researcher at BFA, and I was part of the team that did this work. Thank you.
Great. And so my first question, let's start with David. What role do you think platforms should be playing in e-commerce?
Thank you, John. So platforms do play quite a significant role in e-commerce, right? And I'll specifically speak in these emerging markets, talk about Kenya and Africa as a whole, right? When you look at the actual percentages of e-commerce adoption in the research we've done, not only in Masoko, but other e-commerce platforms, the penetration of e-commerce is about 5 to 8%. So we're talking about 90% of the users out there who probably might have heard about e-commerce, or probably 50% of them have never heard about e-commerce. So what role do platforms play in that? Actually, a big role. When you look at the e-commerce strategy, it's about, and Masoko specifically, it's about connecting markets in the urban areas to markets in the rural areas. So it's both ways. So how does a vendor or a merchant in the remote parts of the country, how do we open the market for them? And how do businesses in the urban areas open their markets to rural areas to get their goods there? So e-commerce in terms of platforms kind of bridges that gap, reducing the logistical headaches of getting goods and services across this not so well-defined logistics topology. And two is how do merchants get access to credit? So what we've come to realize, mobile payment in Kenya in particular is large. So revolving credit and revolving money is a huge driver to people wanting to do business. So how do you translate that to platforms? So Masoko as a whole is kind of trying to encompass or bring together all aspects of e-commerce from logistics to payments into one platform that simplifies the journey a merchant has to take to increase their market or market share. So platforms do play a critical, if not a major role in driving e-commerce in Kenya and Africa as a whole.
Thank you, David. How about you, how about for us?
Yeah, thanks. I would echo the comments that David made. I think he's spot on. I think platforms do play a very important role in e-commerce.
Firas, you're a bit low. Can you speak a bit louder?
Yeah, is that better?
Yes, much better.
Okay. Yeah, so just to follow up on what David said, platforms are, of course, very, very important. In fact, I think if you look at e-commerce, globally speaking, most of the successful providers have done so from a platform approach. And so I think specifically in the case of Africa or our experiences in Tanzania, I think one of the things that we could improve on is building out platforms that are more localized and meet the needs of the businesses in those regions and the issues that they are facing. I think the way that your presentation has gone, I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs trying to cobble together solutions from free platforms that are essentially globally available. So either everything from WhatsApp to Instagram to Facebook, but then of course they need to figure out on their own, how do they manage the payment, how do they manage the follow-up, and there might be tools available in these platforms for them, but they may not be relevant to their specific circumstance. So, you know, online advertising may work in the US, but it may not really work that well in Tanzania, the way at least it's structured in these platforms. So my point would be, let's develop platforms that are specific to the economic situation of these small and medium businesses in the regions that they're operating, and make those, you know, the flavor of that platform more relevant to what their needs are and what they're trying to do.
Great, thank you. My next question is about trust and e-commerce. In FIBR's work, we've talked a lot about trust and how it pertains to MSMEs. Catalyst Fund has also done a lot of work around trust with their toolkits. What approaches do both Masoko and Sarafu take to increase trust in your marketplaces and with your stakeholders? How do we increase trust in the current conditions? And let me also ask in the form of a riddle, what came first? What comes first, trust or e-commerce? And let me ask Firas to answer this first.
Sure. So from what we've seen so far, absolutely trust comes before e-commerce. I don't think you can have an e-commerce transaction without some level of trust from the customer that what they order online actually is what they will get. I mean, I even remember myself, the first online transaction I did way back in maybe 2000 or 2001, I wasn't 100% sure I would get what I ordered. I know that my credit card was debited, but I wasn't sure if I would actually receive. I think I was buying a watch. And when I received it, I was amazed that it was exactly what I thought it was supposed to be. And then from there, I didn't have an issue. So we see that with our own customers that we're onboarding now, situations where they may know the brand, they may be trusting us that, oh, these people are there, but in the end, it's still, there's something in the back of their mind that it's a new product, it's a new way of doing business, and they're not 100% certain whether it's going to work. So one thing that we've done with our retail customers is we'll literally take what's the equivalent of, say, $50 US, so and put it on their on their desk in their shop, and we'll say, you keep this money if the order you make on this platform doesn't show up in the time that we said it would show up. And once they get past that hurdle, and they basically give back the money the next day because the product shows up. And then, within 2 or 3 orders, there's really no question on their part. So it's a behavior change that is based on trusting a system that is totally new. And what I tell my team is that trust is very difficult to acquire, but very easy to lose. So it's also incumbent upon the e-commerce operators in the region that when they do create trust or they attempt to create trust, they don't drop it. They don't drop the ball. Because we've seen some of that, particularly in Africa and e-commerce, where the customer hasn't been served the way that they expected. And that can really kill the market, because then they're even less likely to go with the one that may actually fulfill that promise. So it's from my perspective, it's not so much a mystery. I think it's clearly trust before commerce.
Great.
And you're totally right. Yes, I do agree with that, trust. But from my perspective, let me break it down in a little bit more. So trust comes in 2 ways. There's the trust but verify. That's the first stage. So e-commerce is pretty new in Kenya or Africa as a whole. And when you look at the behavioral kind of a shift towards e-commerce, people still want to feel and touch the products they're buying. So when I talk about the trust but verify stage, there's a couple of things we've done in terms of research to segment customers. There's those who are part and seeing an ad about e-commerce and are thinking about buying stuff. Those are the groups of people we kind of categorize into trust but verify. They're thinking about buying, but they're not sure. So they go ahead and buy and just, let's try this out. Let's see if it's real. And then there's the trust that is built up over time. Okay, how do you build that trust? One and very critical thing about trust is what you're offering on e-commerce platform exactly what they're getting in terms of quality and in terms of time of delivery. That's what builds a long-term relationship with the customers that we work with. So yes, trust comes first, but it does come in stages. So I'd say trust but verify first, then e-commerce comes in, then we have to prove yourselves and remove all doubt from these new adopters of e-commerce. And then they start trusting the platform. And what that leads to, what we've noticed is, as you build that trust, the word of mouth becomes stronger. And there's no other stronger marketing tool than word of mouth. So if the products you put on the site, in terms of the images, the videos, match exactly what you deliver and deliver in the amount of time that you specified on the site, that creates a sense of euphoria. So, something like a new, wow factor. I've ordered something and it's being delivered. That's something that's not been seen in most remote parts in Africa or in Kenya as a whole. And that's what we've noticed in the last couple of, let's say 6 months, as we shift our strategy into building trust through logistics and delivering what we put on the site.
Great, thank you, David. Let me turn to Anne. And not only are you a researcher, Anne, but you're also a consumer as well as a small merchant yourself. So in your experience in the e-commerce journey in Kenya, what do you think are the merchant personas that are getting the most out of selling online right now? And as a merchant yourself, what would you personally like to see?
All right, thanks, John. I'll say for me, the person who would work very well is the experimental MSME, like the story that we shared earlier for Agnes. And this is precisely because she's doing something that she likes, like she has passionate about it. It's like she's not going out of her way, but she saw an opportunity out of doing what she likes best. And I think in any type of business, when you're starting and you're passionate about everything else, you are able to put all your effort and you don't easily give up, unlike a person who does not have passion about the business. The other thing I'd like to comment generally in the Kenyan landscape is I think e-commerce right now is the in thing, and basically because of the convenience it offers, especially whereby you don't have to go out of your way. Most people, young adults, even old, they're always on WhatsApp, they're always on Instagram and Facebook. So you just find something that is of interest to you and you go ahead and pay. And in Kenya, I'll say we are lucky because of having mobile-friendly payment system. So it's very easy because most of the merchants, they have the merchant till number, whereby you can be able to pay seamlessly and then wait for the delivery. One thing that I'll say still poses as a challenge for someone like me who is a small merchant is like the delivery, because we find out that most customers, and generally in Kenya, we don't have physical addresses, unlike in third world countries. So that poses as a hindrance to us being able to have a seamless entire process from the time someone is placing an order to the time of the delivery. Yeah, but I also agree with Firaz and David in terms of like it is the game changer in these African markets. Thanks.
Thank you. So the UNCTAD publishes an index on readiness for online shopping that provides 4 indicators: bank or mobile money account penetration, internet usage, availability of internet servers, and the reliability of postal services for delivery. In your opinion, panel, what is the primary barrier that we need to overcome for e-commerce to succeed in the African mainstream? Yeah, and whoever wants to go first.
I'm happy to jump in. This is Faraz. From my perspective, there are really 4 things that need to happen. And there may be others, but these are the 4 that we face from our side. One is smartphone penetration, particularly for end consumers. I still don't think it's there. And even those that do have smartphones that might be using data, they may not be familiar enough with how to manipulate the app. They could be just using for WhatsApp, make phone calls and things like that. So I think smartphone penetration and knowledge needs to increase. 2, the total addressable market needs to expand beyond just some pockets of major cities. So we need to see customers that have smartphones that are willing to use them to purchase enough such that the cost of getting them the product is by volume big enough to cover all the logistics involved in making that happen. 3, there needs to be a much better third-party logistic network. Putting the entire onus on, say, a small or medium-sized operator to figure out how to get a product to a customer without having reliable third-party partners is too much for them. It's very, very difficult. And basically what that means is your e-commerce is just a means of getting to meet someone in person and then doing a transaction, which has its own value and benefit, but it does limit the potential for that customer to sell outside of his or her own territory. And then, of course, we already talked about trust. I think people just need to have more and more better positive e-commerce experiences such that they can build on that and be more comfortable with these different platforms and approaches that are coming up.
So, I mean, if I can jump in on that too, I think, yeah, 3 key points. To me, the biggest and single most important thing to overcome is logistics, right? And I'll explain why. When you look at mobile money, Kenya's penetration for mobile money is about over 90%. So everybody, even in rural areas, use what we call M-Pesa, one of the greatest innovations in Kenya or even in the world that we've ever seen. So mobile payment penetration is not a problem. 2, smartphone penetration. Yes, we still lag behind. About 40% of the population has smartphones. But that is where super platforms come in. That's where platforms come in. We start by asking the question, what problem are we trying to solve, right? We're trying to open up markets, urban markets to rural areas and rural merchants to open up their markets in urban centers. And how do we do that? They probably don't need smartphones, right? Because we have to rethink e-commerce. It's not about coming to a website and buying, right? It's about how do we get goods A to point B and vice versa, right? And to us in Masoko, I think logistics is something we will be cracking in the next couple of months. In terms of one, reducing the time of moving goods from one point to another, and 2, just opening up the markets. There's a lot of challenges in terms of addressing. There's no real addresses, and that's a challenge we're battling with each and every day. And the cost of logistics, just moving from the urban center to rural areas, just because of the transport medium. There's not a lot of logistic partners that actually go to remote parts of the country. So I think once logistics is kind of fully, not fully, but unlocked in Africa, I think that will open up e-commerce to a different level. From a smartphone perspective, I think we can solve that with technology. We can bring agents closer to the people, right? Agent with a tablet, and the people can go to the shop and order. But clearly, logistics to us is key driver to e-commerce in Africa and in Kenya as a whole.
Great, thank you, David. Let me, since we have about just 5 or so minutes left in our session, I'd love to open it up to the Q&A with the audience. I see we have some messages queued in the Q&A and also the chat box. So one question from Hamilton is, what typically is the first social media platform? What's the gateway drug? Is it WhatsApp? And could you take that one, or anyone?
Yeah, sure. Just to answer Hamilton, I'll say, I think it depends with the country, because what we found out, like in Tanzania specifically, where we did this research, it was like Instagram was very popular. So it was easier to post on Instagram and then push the message to Facebook because of the reach that Facebook has. Almost everyone now has a Facebook account. Then but some other merchants also complained about, Facebook itself having some jokers, people who are not very serious, and you cannot maybe be able to convert a lot of business from the Facebook itself. But eventually what we found out that those who are serious, they would extend the conversation now on the WhatsApp. So I will say it depends on the country, but Facebook seems to play a huge role in that. Thanks.
Great. I'll switch over to a question from Anne in the chat box. Was there any worry among merchants that formalizing businesses will create digital records and open up to taxation? And this is actually for any of the panelists, I think, in your experience dealing with merchants and retailers.
I would say we did have this issue. There is some concern or fear amongst merchants, but that is starting to subside, in particular because at least where we're operating in Tanzania, the government has been much more strict on taxation issues. So it's come to the point where if businesses don't have any records, they get fined more than what they would have otherwise been fined if they had just paid the taxes. So people are now in some ways looking for systems that validate at least some of their transactions, so that tax authorities are seeing that. And we're of course 100% encouraging of that, and the government has started to develop systems around this. So I think it's less and less becoming an issue because the system is in general moving towards a more formalized place.
Thank you. I'll move on to another question from Alexa, who is working on an initiative at the IFC. Can you speak to any successful experiences on platforms to distinguish barriers that women face as MSMEs, as well as any tools and services for women merchants? I'll open this up to the entire panel.
Maybe I can take that, John. And basically, I'll say it did not come out strongly during our research. However much I can say we had biasness in terms of the recruitment, because we had so many female respondents as our sample size. But I think what generally we found out, it was the barriers that were there were for everyone. They were not like gender-based. Yeah.
Great. And so I'll take I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. And Carmen, you should correct me if I'm incorrect on the timing. So I think we did speak to some extent to Sylvia's question is about constraints in online merchant businesses in terms of accessible, reliable courier. So we did speak about logistics and last mile, trust and delivery channels to be encouraged to buy online. Is there anything else that the panelists might add to the question around like courier, delivery, last mile fulfillment?
Yeah, I think I spoke to that, just being logistics, right? Two key factors in e-commerce, right? Is what I'm seeing, what I'll be getting, right? And two, if you say I'm going to get the goods in 3 days, is it actually 3 days, even with the barriers we have? So, I mean, those are aspects or things we need to consider in terms of breaking the e-commerce barriers in Kenya and Africa as a whole.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I think one of the issues is also transparency. I mean, as David was saying, around the delivery and the confirmation of that delivery, but also I think we need to develop transparency around the buyer and the seller. So one thing that people are always confused or unsure about, even Anne brought this up on the Facebook example, is the person I'm dealing with a real person or is he a joker? And there are using these third-party platforms like Facebook and Instagram, you don't have any validation of that because those are not platforms designed to validate the veracity of a particular buyer or seller. So building that framework into the transaction platform, allowing people to see, yes, this person has done this much business or he's rated in some way, almost as we do for credit scoring. I think that's really, really critical, particularly for small businesses to be able to play in this space, because then the transaction cost goes very, very high. You have to constantly validate, is this person right? You have to worry about it. It may prevent you from pursuing a particular transaction or not. So, so that ability to present yourself as a valid seller who's done a certain amount of business, I think is really a critical part of the whole puzzle.
Great. I know that we're coming up on the end of our time for the webinar, and I believe that we have some poll results that we'd like to share, Carmen, is that correct?
Actually, it's another poll just to ask how was the material relevant. So I'm going to launch the poll, and if you could answer, you can select multiple choices. All right, thank you for answering that. John, back to you.
Okay, and Carmen, do we have time for one more question, or do we need to wrap up?
We have time for one more question, then we can wrap
up. So, and I apologize to the audience. I will take the facilitator's privilege to ask one last question from my side, and that question is for the panel, and whoever wishes to answer, how will e-commerce in Africa play out compared to other e-commerce ecosystems in China or the US? Will it look similar to in Africa, or will it be unique? What's your opinion?
Sorry,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I would say it's definitely going to be different. It'll be unique, because I think the challenges that African businesses face are different than what you face in other countries. I think we've talked about logistics. That example keeps coming up again and again, but it is really at the core of it, because if you look at the e-commerce operators, say operating in the US or Europe, they don't worry about last mile delivery like the operators will have to in Africa. And also, I think the payment mechanisms are very, very different. So you don't have credit card infrastructure in most parts of Africa, which is the primary tool for payment for online operators elsewhere. So just those two differences, and also I actually would say that e-commerce has an even bigger opportunity in Africa than it would have in other markets, and I would just leave at this point. I think there are issues of access that are solved by e-commerce in Africa that are not solved in places in developed markets. So for example, if I wanted to buy a cell phone, I have probably 100 shops in any city in America. I could go buy that cell phone. I don't have to buy it online. But a particular type of cell phone, if I want to buy it in Africa, I may not find it in a shop anywhere in my city. And so e-commerce would develop that access for me in a way that otherwise would not be available. And a cell phone is just one example. It could be any product. But the point being that whereas e-commerce solved issues of convenience for in developed markets and maybe service delivery, et cetera, it didn't necessarily solve the issue of access, which was already there. It was just more of a matter of convenience. With the African e-commerce, I think you're solving the problem of access, which I think will make it that much more of a leapfrog, I guess you could say, in terms of how commerce happens in Africa.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, totally agree with that. 100%.
Great. Thank you, David. Thank you, Firas. Thank you, Anne, for being our panel. Just one more slide. So today's presentation gave you an introduction to the work that we have done at FIBR on super platforms and small merchants. We have many more publications and resources available to learn more. So take a look at some of these published blogs, reports, and some still coming. The presentation recording will be available afterwards, so please refer to the links that you will see. And yesterday we just published the Digital Commerce and Youth Employment in Africa white paper that takes a deeper look at the way platforms are providing employment opportunities for Africa's youth in the rising iWorker segment. Some 80 million digitally connected workers will occur by 2030, and it provides recommendations for governments to take action to improve employment outcomes in digital commerce. So with those resources shared, I want to thank everyone for attending and joining us for this webinar. Again, we'll share the recording and also the link to the presentation. Please visit our website, fibrproject.org,